Welcome to Passionate World Talk Radio. Educate, enlighten, entertain.
This show does not provide medical advice. If you're having a medical emergency, please call 911. Anything you hear here should be discussed with your primary health care provider. Hello and welcome to Everyone Dies, the radio show, produced by Passionate World Talk Radio, whose goal it is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. I'm Marianne Matzo, and for the next 30 minutes, I am your host. Today I have the pleasure of talking with Jan Douglas. Janet Douglas, she is a woman who was an occupational therapist, lived and traveled and done all kinds of wonderful things, and went to a wedding in England and had a stroke, and had a major stroke. And when they took her into the hospital for surgery there, they told her family that she had about a 10% chance of surviving the surgery. And fortunately, she did survive. And trust me, I hope you get her book called A Wonderful Stroke of Luck so that you can hear about her story. Last night I was reading it, and I found myself wanting to read just one more chapter, and I got kind of late because it has that kind of page-turner quality in terms of being able to hear a story that you never really get to hear. You never get to hear people say, here's what happened during my stroke. I've never, in all my years of nursing, I've never had somebody be able to tell me this happened, and this happened, and this is what I was thinking. And it's absolutely fascinating. So, Janet Douglas, welcome to Everyone Dies. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
So we always talked a little bit. I talked with my guests a little bit before, like, what would you want to talk about? And Mrs. Douglas was saying that she really kind of wanted to talk about survival, and that she was a little bit curious about why we were called Everyone Dies, even though it's true. It's one of those things that kind of smacks you in the face, doesn't it, Mrs. Douglas?
Yes, it does.
What did you think when you first saw that name?
Well, I was a little mystified by it, and I thought, well, yes, everyone does die. And I'm also going to say that there are different definitions of dying, because people can die without having their heart actually stop or their brain stop functioning. In other words, they can be so distraught over a health issue or a family issue that they essentially stop living. And that was a situation that I found confronted me in the early days post-stroke. I was so heavily disabled at that time and totally without identity or memory, and essentially my life had ended. It had ended as I knew it, but over time, and this is the I hope upbeat part of my book and my story, is that I began to realize that the life that I had before had died, but there was a whole new life that was waiting for me, that I just had to figure out how to grasp it and move forward.
Did you find that it was a difficult decision for you to, in a sense, let go of what was and grasp what that new life was?
It was extremely difficult, and it took a long time. And I think most people are familiar with the stages of grieving that are usually associated with death and dying. But I associate it more broadly with loss. And I went through all those stages of denial and anger and bargaining, and through the whole thing until finally the last stage, the hardest one of all, was acceptance that who I was now was not who I was before, but that the new person had an awful lot going for her.
What did it take for you to find that acceptance? Do you remember the feeling or the process?
It took a lot of time, and it took a lot of support, I would say, from family and friends. And I have to say realistically that while I think all of my family stuck with me, that certainly was not true of friends.
Really?
And part of the process that I had to work through, and that was hard, was figuring out that who my friends really were and who were friends and who were habits. And I meant by that, who were the people who hung around when I was very successful and had a lot to give, first, and then disappeared immediately when that was no longer the case, when I no longer had an important, powerful position that could benefit them. This may sound very cynical, but I'm trying to be honest that the people who were in it for me, in the relationship for me, as opposed to for themselves. And that was tough and painful. But again, at the end of that long process, I emerged with the nucleus of old friends who were real friends and some new ones. And the ones who fell away were the habits, who were not friends at all.
I had a real serious illness about, 8 years ago. I went into the hospital the day before Thanksgiving and really tanked. There's just no term for it. Ended up with a trach and on a ventilator and didn't even wake up out of the drug-induced coma they put me into the day after Christmas. And my kids were in 8th and 9th grade, my girls. And I knew I had friends. I mostly knew I had colleagues because they were people that I worked with. But it wasn't until after that experience and the things that these quote-unquote colleagues did for me that I realized, I the feeling that I had, Ms. Douglas, was very humbling, was that these people took care of me. A group of nurse practitioners I worked with came in and said, "Your legs are terrible. You have your hair on your legs is so long." And they came in with a razor and shaved my legs. Now I can tell you, being on a ventilator, I really did not care how hairy my legs were. But they were like, you would have cared, like in the day, you would have cared. We'll take care of you. And these people bought Christmas presents for my daughters. And at one point after I woke up and came home, one of my daughters was going through a wallet. She had all these gift cards. I said, "Where did you get those?" She said, "From all your friends for Christmas." These people knew I was in a coma and my girls were not going to have a Christmas, and they gave them a Christmas. So it's that I felt like this incredible sense of being humbled that people cared about me and my family enough to do those things. Maybe I probably wasn't as successful as you to have people who were habits, but I found out who were my friends.
Yes, and I hardly endorse that because I don't mean to be negative at all. I had that same experience of people being absolutely wonderful, and my daughters were college age at the time it happened to me. And the people who cooked and brought food and did all of those things were just so remarkably kind. But if I'd had to predict before who would be the people who would come through for us as a family, it was an entirely different group of people who did. In other words, the ones that I thought might have been super supportive and helpful were not, and the others that I hadn't really thought about too much were the ones who, as you said, were humbling and just overwhelming in their kindness and generosity and acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to hark back to something else you said about your hair, because I was in a coma in all for about 5 weeks, during which time I crossed the Atlantic in what was called an air ambulance. It was actually a Boeing 747, the back of which had the seats removed and a elaborate stretcher things hanging up. So I was back there. But I had no memory of that journey for months. But when I got to the hospital in Chicago where I live, it was a hospital I used to work at, and I was there probably about 2 weeks as I started to regain consciousness. And when they took me to therapy and they stuck a mirror in front of me, I had no idea who that person was looking back at me, and I thought it was my Auntie Mary with a mohawk, because I had like a stripper's head down the middle, and the rest was gone. And I had no idea that I was that person.
Did you cry?
No, I was
Really?
mad. I was mad. Like, get that person away from me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did a lot of crying. I don't know if it was because I was off my hormones or what, but like not even being able to shut off the shower because I had no strength afterwards. It was like everything moved me to tears. I was a wreck.
And that was not my experience. I didn't cry at all. And my husband, and in particular, would come and say things like, let it out, just cry, just give vent to your feelings. I didn't know what he was talking about because I was angry. That was my overriding emotion at the time. So tears were not the right response, and incredibly frustrating. I mean, later when I got home and struggled with all the things I could no longer do, then there were many times that I cried. I tried to do it when no one was looking. You know what I mean? When no one was around. Yeah. But, yes. But not at the time, not in the early months.
So the anger that you had, what were you angry with? Your body, your situation, your higher power, all of it?
Over time, all of the above. Initially, I was angry because I had a peculiar result of the stroke, which is a condition called anosognosia, which meant that I had no idea there was anything wrong with me. It's a form of denial. But I didn't know why I was being kept in the hospital. I didn't think there was anything wrong with me. I didn't know why all these people kept coming and poking and trying to teach me to do things which I thought I was perfectly capable of doing myself. Of course, I wasn't. And I was angry about the food in the hospital and the fact that they kept feeding me scrambled eggs every day, for breakfast, which they said I ordered, but I hate scrambled eggs, and there's no way I would have ordered them. But what I didn't know was that I had a visual defect as a result of the stroke that meant I couldn't see straight lines. So I was making my little check mark beside what I thought said toast, and it was actually on the line above was scrambled eggs. So I was ordering them myself.
Oh, my gosh.
At one point, I was so angry when the scrambled eggs came that I said in a very loud voice, if they send me eggs again, I'm going to throw them at the wall. Well, the nurse or whoever was in charge that day thought I was being overly aggressive. And my next visit was from a psychiatrist who said I had been showing signs of aggression and inappropriate behavior, and and then of course the net effect of that was to make me even angrier.
I was going to say, did you say to them, you want inappropriate behavior? I'll show you inappropriate behavior.
Had I had the quickness of wit to think of that, I'm sure I would have.
Well, and that's the thing is they had given me Ativan to because I couldn't breathe. I had this pneumonia and adult respiratory distress syndrome, which is what people with the coronavirus, when they go in respiratory, that's what they have. But I was a trendsetter. I had it way before everybody else did, and so I was delusional a lot because I didn't do on the Ativan, and so I would just get so mad at them because I would talk about whatever was in my delusion, and then they would do a mental status assessment, saying, "Well, do you know where you are?" I was like, "Yes, of course I know where I am," and I'd give them, all the right answers to those questions, and then go right back to my delusion.
That happened somewhat to me too, but it was because when I was making they were getting me ready to make the transatlantic journey back, there was a fear of seizures. So they put me on an anti-seizure medication, and the effect of that, well, of course I didn't know, and the effect of that was to make me extremely dizzy. Oh. And when I tried to sit up or stand up, the world would be spinning around me. So when they started to take me to physical therapy and they would make me stand up, the whole world would be going around and around and around. And I would insist upon being put back to bed. And if the therapist wouldn't put me back, or a nurse wouldn't, I would con another patient's relative into helping me get back into bed. Or even the guy who was delivering flowers, anybody, just get me back in the bed. And I would go under the covers and I would stay there. And that resulted in a sign being erected at the bottom of my bed that read, "Under no circumstances put this patient back to bed." Well, I was pretty mad about that too. So you ask why I was angry. I was angry at everything that happened. And a lot of it.
I think you and I must be related in some way, Ms. Douglas, because they wanted to keep me in bed, and I kept wanting to get up and wanting to be untied because I was on a ventilator, and they tie you down because your natural reaction to try to pull things out. And they had these things on my legs, and so anybody who came in my room, I convinced them to untie me. And sometimes untie me and put me in the chair. I just wanted to get up in the chair. And I convinced my surgeon, I convinced my friends, and the nurses were so mad at everybody. Stop untying her.
Well, it's very interesting because at one point I was restrained too, but for a different reason. I kept falling out of bed.
Ooh.
And the part, my left side was completely paralyzed, but I didn't know it was paralyzed. I just thought it was gone. That's the way it manifested to me, was I had no left side. So for some reason, the nurse's call button always seemed to be out of reach, and I eventually got them to put it on my right side, but it was, again, my balance was, having lost all sensation of one side, one's balance is completely disrupted. So I would carefully let the rail down in order to reach for the rope to pull for the nurse to come.
Oh,
and
my
then
God.
3 times I just fell out of the bed.
Oh, my
And
gosh.
of course, hospitals don't like that sort of thing because you get into trouble.
Especially when they've gone into your head and your head's been broken open.
Exactly.
That's a real problem, Miss Douglas.
I know. And, incidents having to be reported. You know, it's a stain on the character of the hospital if patients keep falling out of bed, especially if it's the same one on a fairly regular basis. So there was a certain amount of tying down that went along with all of that until I became, more, progressively more lucid, more able to comply. But it took a long time. I was there 9 weeks in the hospital. So
9 weeks.
You have an idea of how long it took me to really start to have an idea of who I was and what was going on before they dared to let me go home.
That is such a long time. I mean, sort of objectively you think, oh, 9 weeks, it's, but when you're in, I was in 6 weeks. So when you're in one room alone, not feeling well, not being able to do what you think you should be able to do, that's like almost forever, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And it's very disorienting. And I've had, in recent weeks with everything that's been going on with COVID, I've found myself with so much empathy and heartache for the patients and the families of people who are in the hospital and can't have visitors and can't have their loved ones around, because I had somebody every day, if not all day, at least part of the day, and I had friends and I had people sitting with me, and just the idea of going through all of that alone is just so heartbreaking.
What do you think, and it's been a while, it was 2002 that this happened,
yes.
Is that correct? And
yes.
So it's what, 18 years ago?
Yes.
Which is kind of mind-blowing that we're talking. That such a major stroke, and that you've written a book and done. You were telling me yesterday that you're the director of human resources, and that you're a very active woman. So, with the perspective of 18 years and looking back on that, do you have a sense or a thought about what it is you've learned? Because I'm sure, like a year afterwards, what you learned is probably different than what you would say you've learned today.
Well, it took a while because I mentioned of the anosognosia. I had some other brain issues too that I couldn't really read. I mean, if when they put something in front of me and asked me to read it out loud, I could, but I couldn't extract the meaning from the words. So in other words, I could read the cat sat on the mat and have no idea what it meant. And that was something that took a while, but I had been so active before the stroke, and I had a fairly high-powered job with a Fortune 500 company, and I got it into my head after about 6 months that the best thing for me to do would be to go back to work. And I was in no way capable, but I didn't know that, so I did go back to work. The company was very understanding, and of course I couldn't drive, but I got driven to and from work a couple or 3 times a week, and that worked to a certain extent in that it put me in a framework that I was familiar with, and I found myself able to function pretty well within that environment. And again, as I said, I couldn't read. At that point, I didn't know I couldn't read properly. I didn't understand that the word alexia, which, I learned as I did my own research later on, was not like aphasia when you lose the ability to speak, but it means the inability to extract meaning from words. So I could fake it amazingly well, and someone would hand me something to sign and say, read this, and I'd say, quickly, just tell me what it says, because I have a lot to do. So they would tell me what it said, and then I would sign it. And when I did start to read again, it was with my ears. In other words, I found that I absolutely love to read. It was one of my favorite, I would say hobby, but I guess a hobby. Things I did when I wasn't working or being with my family was to read. I traveled a lot for work, so I'd read on airplanes. But since I couldn't do that, I started to listen to books on tape. And I found that was a great substitute. And gradually over time, I found alternatives to do things around the house or to do my job or to function pretty well. And the more I did, the more I felt like I was getting back to who I was before. But it took a long time. It took probably 3 or 4 years until I really got back the memories and the understanding of my own identity, even though it was different from the way it was before. But and it's 18 years, but I'd say it took me 5 years to be in a position. People kept saying you should write a book because you used to be an occupational therapist, and it'd be very interesting for people to know your perspective. But the people who were saying that had no idea how far I still had to go to be able to even think about sitting down and being able to write or type. I now had the use of only one hand, and one of my eyes was affected, so that lines, as I mentioned about the scrambled eggs, the lines weren't going in the same direction, so I would be off a little bit in terms of trying to read. And I, to this day, cannot read a spreadsheet because there's a bobble in the line that will put me completely off.
Oh my!
I'm kind of rambling, so I hope I'm answering your question.
Well, I guess what I wanted to know is that right now at your, I don't know how old you are, but at this age self, looking back over the last 18 years, what do you say to yourself? Do you say, like, hot damn, I'm an incredible woman, which clearly you are?
No, I say thank God I'm alive, because I have 4 grandsons that I would never have known. They're the light of my life. I've just passed 45 years of being married to the same man. I was at both of my daughter's weddings, and and I was able to recreate myself professionally. And I worked before, as I mentioned, for a Fortune 500 company, and it was all about being busy and traveling and making lots of money for the company and being very well paid myself. The new me works for a nonprofit that resettles refugees. It's just in one location. It's about a 40-minute drive from my home, and it's a whole different experience, but I love it. And so all of these things that have come about in that 18 years, we started off talking about dying and the different ways of dying. And I'm just going to flip back to that too. I've come to know a lot of stroke survivors through my experience and through writing the book, and through some family experiences, and through being a therapist, who essentially died when they had the stroke, even though their hearts didn't stop, but their life did, and they lost the ability to be able to kind of get up and go and move on with a new life. And I feel so incredibly blessed that didn't happen to me, and I was able to put my energy and effort into a new life, a different kind of life. I can't dance anymore, but I can get around. And I can I can't ride a horse anymore, but I can still pat one on the nose.
Mhm.
And so many things that I can still do that make dying a horrible alternative.
Mhm. Well, I'm so pleased that you took time to talk with me, and I'm so pleased you wrote this book and that Tom sent it to me, and I'm going to finish reading it because it's just absolutely fascinating. It's like being able to get inside to a place that generally you're not allowed into, and your storytelling, if you will, expressing what went on is just exquisite. So I'm so pleased, at least, for myself that you survived, and I'm pleased for your family and you that you survived to be able to have those experiences and to share with us this experience that, without you, we just really would not have. And I hope that we get a chance at another time to talk about another aspect of your book and your life. I feel very blessed to have met you today, Ms. Douglas.
Thank you, and thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you. And to our listeners, I want to thank you for spending time with us during this show, Everyone Dies. You can read our blog and listen to our other podcasts at everyonedies.org. Thank you to our producer, Jeannie White, and our CEO, Lillian Caldwell. We produce a new show every Wednesday to answer questions related to life-threatening illness, dying, and death. Remember, you can listen to Passionate World Talk Radio on Spreaker and our shows wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have a topic you'd like to discuss on our show, please email me, Marianne, at everyonedies.org. Let me spell that for you. It's Marianne, MARIANNE, at everyonedies.org, EVERY, the number 1, dies.org. I hope that you live your best life every day. And remember, every day is a gift. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to Passionate World Talk Radio. You can listen to this program all over again by going over to https://passionateworldtalkradio.com. You can also hear it on Spotify, Spreaker, Amazon Alexa, AMFM247.com every Tuesday evening between 8 and 9 p.m. YouTube, Facebook Live, LinkedIn, and all the other podcast directories one can find on the Internet.